In the shadow of Eden, after the flaming sword barred the way back to paradise, Adam and Eve stepped into a world that felt colder, harsher, and painfully distant from the presence of God. They were no longer walking with him in the cool of the day. They now lived with the heavy weight of consequence, the sting of disobedience, and the knowledge that their actions had changed everything. But life continued, and with that life came a new chapter. Cain, their firstborn son, and later Abel. Imagine that moment. Eve holding her newborn, knowing that despite her failure, God still allowed something beautiful, life, to spring forth. There must have been hope in her eyes. Maybe she thought this child would be the one to crush the serpent's head as promised. And then came Abel, a second son, two brothers, growing up side by side, but destined for very different paths. Cain was a worker of the soil, a farmer, likely strong and practical, someone who toiled under the sun with sweat and calloused hands. Abel, on the other hand, became a keeper of sheep, a shepherd. He spent his days in quieter fields, guiding flocks, perhaps more reflective, more contemplative. Two boys, same parents, same environment, but different hearts and callings. What's powerful here is that this is the first generation born outside Eden. They didn't taste paradise like their parents had. All they knew was a world where pain existed, where work was hard, and where the presence of God was no longer a daily experience, but something sought after. Still, they were raised with knowledge of the Creator. Adam and Eve must have told them stories of Eden, of God's voice, of the serpent's lies, of the tree that brought death. And somewhere in their upbringing, these boys learned to offer sacrifices, to bring something of themselves before God. This sets the stage for what's to come. A family trying to move forward after loss. Two brothers shaped by the same home, but heading toward a tragic divide. Before jealousy, before murder, before blood cried out from the ground, there was simply a family trying to worship, trying to live, trying to find their way in a broken world. And isn't that something we all can relate to? Trying to find our purpose, our place, our peace, on the other side of something lost. Cain and Abel weren't just characters in a story, they were the beginning of our human struggle, a mirror of what can happen when the heart is left unchecked. This is where their journey begins, and it starts not with death but with birth, and a deep longing to connect with God in a world that had forgotten how. Time passes, and we're brought into a sacred moment, both Cain and Abel preparing an offering for the Lord. At first glance it seems simple, two brothers, each bringing a portion of their work to God. Cain, the farmer, brings produce from the ground, grains, fruits, vegetables. Abel, the shepherd, brings fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. But what happens next is where the atmosphere shifts dramatically, because God accepts Abel's offering and rejects Cain's. Now, let's pause and explore this moment more deeply. Why would God respond differently to each of their gifts? Was it the content, the attitude, the intention? The Bible doesn't spell it out entirely, but it gives us strong clues. Abel brought not just any animal, he brought the firstborn, the best. And not just the animal, but the fat portions, which in the ancient world symbolized richness, value, sacrifice. It was a costly gift, a gift that reflected reverence, honor, and true worship. Cain's offering, by contrast, seems to lack the same heart. The text doesn't say he brought the first fruits or the best. It simply says he brought some of the fruits of the soil. It reads as casual, routine, as if Cain fulfilled a religious duty, but without the devotion, without the surrender, without the faith. And that's the key. Hebrews 11:4 tells us that by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain. Faith, that unseen force that breathes life into our worship, that's what was missing in Cain. You see, this wasn't just about fruit versus lamb. It was about the heart behind the gift. And God, who sees not as man sees, looked directly into that heart. One heart burned with love, gratitude, and trust. The other was filled with something else, something colder, transactional, maybe even prideful. And here's where this ancient moment begins to echo into our lives. How many times do we go through the motions of religion without the substance? Of relationship? How often do we offer God leftovers instead of our best? Our time, our attention, our hearts. Cain's mistake wasn't farming. It was forgetting that worship is about who we're giving to, not just what we give. When God responded, With favor to Abel's sacrifice and not to Cain's, it wasn't favoritism, it was an invitation. A chance for Cain to look inward, to humble himself, to realign his heart. But Cain didn't do that. Instead of introspection, he chose offense. And that choice would be the crack that let jealousy in. But at this stage, we're still at the altar. Still at that tender space between brothers where one gift is lifted and the other is left behind. A holy moment becomes a turning point, because how we handle God's response to our worship often reveals the condition of our soul. This isn't just about two brothers long ago, it's about all of us. When we approach God, are we doing it with reverence, with faith, or are we just checking a box, offering some of ourselves instead of the first? Cain and Abel stand before us as two examples, not just of worship, but of the heart behind it. And what comes next is the tragic result of a heart that refused to be healed. Now the moment arrives that changes everything. God rejects Cain's offering. And this rejection isn't thunderous or dramatic. It's quiet, but it cuts deep. Scripture says, Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. That's it, but behind those few words lies a volcano of emotion, shame, confusion, bitterness, and above all, resentment. You see, rejection can do one of two things to the human heart. It can humble us or it can harden us. Cain chose the second path. Instead of asking why, instead of seeking to grow, to change, to understand what God was teaching him, he turned inward. He folded his arms around his pride and let his emotions fester. And that's where the real danger begins. Let's sit in Cain's shoes for a second. He had brought something to God. He had made an offering. Maybe it wasn't the best, maybe it lacked heart, but it was something. And when God didn't accept it, Cain didn't see it as a call to deeper faith. He saw it as a personal attack, an unfair slight. And the worst part? His brother Abel's offering was accepted. That comparison stung like salt in a wound. How familiar is that? Think about it. How often do we compare our lives to others? How many times have we seen someone else receive favor, success, blessing, and instead of celebrating them, something in us quietly whispers, "Why not me?" That's the voice Cain listened to. The voice of jealousy disguised as justice. The voice that says you deserve what they got. But here's what makes this moment even more powerful. God doesn't abandon Cain. He comes to him. He speaks. He asks, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?" God isn't scolding. He's inviting. He's giving Cain a way out, a chance to confess, to process, to realign. And then God gives Cain a warning that still speaks to all of us today. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. That imagery is chilling. Sin is not just an idea. It's like a wild animal, crouching, ready to pounce. It waits for the right moment, when our guard is down, when our pride is wounded, when we feel overlooked. That's when it lunges. And Cain, standing at that emotional crossroads, has a choice: wrestle with his heart, or surrender to the shadows. Unfortunately, Cain doesn't answer God. There's no dialogue, just silence. And sometimes silence says everything. Cain's heart is already leaning in a dangerous direction. Rejection doesn't humble him, it enrages him, and the resentment that's building is about to spill over. This isn't just ancient history, it's emotional truth. All of us have faced moments when something we offered, something we tried, something we hoped for, was rejected. And in those moments we feel seen, but not in the way we want. We feel exposed, vulnerable. And the temptation is to cover that pain with pride, to turn rejection into resentment. But God's invitation still stands. Why are you angry? He still speaks. He still warns. He still hopes we'll turn around before the crouching sin takes over. But Cain, he's not ready to listen. And the silence between him and God, it becomes the space where jealousy takes root. There are moments in the Bible where the silence between the lines says more than the words on the page. And this is one of those moments. After God speaks directly to Cain, warning him about the sin crouching at his door, there is nothing. No reply, no cry for help, No sign of struggle, just silence. And that silence is loud. It's in that pause that something begins to fester. The quiet becomes Cain's echo chamber, where jealousy isn't confronted but nurtured, where assumptions grow wild, where the face of his brother Abel, once just a sibling, now becomes a symbol of everything Cain feels he's missing. Acceptance, approval, validation. And that's where the tragedy starts. Because Cain doesn't go talk to God again. He doesn't go to Abel either. He talks to no one, and yet the conversation is happening, just not out loud, it's all internal. And in that inner monologue, jealousy speaks fluently. He starts replaying everything in his mind. Abel's sheep, Abel's smile, the way God looked upon Abel's offering, the way people might have started looking at Abel differently. Each imagined slight adds fuel to a growing fire, and without realizing it, Cain begins to dehumanize his own brother. Abel stops being someone he loves and becomes someone he resents, someone he blames, and jealousy is sneaky. It rarely shouts, it whispers, it rationalizes. It convinces us that we are the victims even when we're becoming the villains. It tells us, you're justified in feeling this way. You're the one being overlooked. You're the one God forgot. But here's the thing. Jealousy doesn't just want to live in your heart. It wants to dominate it. It doesn't settle for sitting quietly. It grows, it plots, it transforms pain into poison. Cain begins to isolate, to plan. And we're told simply, now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. No dramatic argument, no heated confrontation, just a quiet invitation. One brother asking another to take a walk. And yet, in that ordinary sentence lies a deadly intention. What's terrifying is how normal it all appears. This isn't a battlefield. There are no witnesses. It's just the open field, the sky above, the earth below, and two brothers walking side by side. One unaware, the other consumed. The enemy of Cain's soul didn't need to shout. All he had to do was wait. Wait for Cain to stop talking to God. Wait for the bitterness to take root. Wait for the day Cain felt brave enough or broken enough to act. And the saddest part, this moment didn't have to happen. God had reached out, warned him, offered him a way out. But when we don't speak, when we hold everything inside, those emotions take control. This part of Cain's story reminds us of a truth that is as relevant today as it was in Eden. When we don't deal with our inner battles, when we ignore the quiet voice of God, when we let our pain fester in the silence, it doesn't disappear, it grows, and eventually it demands a price. It was just a field, open, quiet, peaceful, a place where grass swayed with the wind, where the sun bathed the earth in light, and birds flew freely overhead. It could have been a place of laughter, of brotherly bonding, of shared stories and dreams, but not that day. That day the field became something else, a stage for betrayal, a silent witness to humanity's first murder. Cain invites Abel to walk with him. The scriptures give us no detail about Abel's thoughts. Did he sense anything? Was there hesitation in Cain's voice? Or did he follow without question, simply trusting his brother? Either way, Abel walks into that field with no sword, no shield, no suspicion, just trust. And that's what makes it even more heartbreaking. This wasn't just an act of violence, it was a breach of the most sacred bond, brotherhood. The same blood, the same family, the same parents, born from the same earth, raised under the same roof. And yet, jealousy had turned that bond into a battlefield. We aren't told how it happened. There's no dramatic description, just one devastating sentence. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. That's it. So simple, so final. And yet, that short line carries the weight of shattered innocence, broken trust, and the haunting echo of what sin, left unchecked, can become. Can you imagine the moment before it happened? Cain, standing there, heart pounding, fists clenched, breathing heavy. Not from fear, but from the rage that had been building inside him for days, maybe weeks. And Abel looking at him, confused, maybe even concerned, perhaps calling out, Cain, what's wrong? And then, silence. A silence that would never be broken again by Abel's voice. The field now holds more than soil. It holds blood. the blood of the innocent. The blood of the first man to die. Not of old age, not by accident, but by the hand of his own brother. And in that moment, the world changed. Death had entered not just as a consequence of sin, but through the heart of another human being. What's chilling is how quiet it all is. There's no crowd, no trial, no warning signs anyone else could see. Just Cain and Abel, and the consequences of a heart poisoned by envy. And isn't that how it often happens in real life? Betrayal doesn't always happen in front of others. Rage doesn't always shout. Sometimes the most destructive moments in human history happen quietly, in places that once felt safe. A living room, a school, a church, or a field. This scene forces us to ask a terrifying question. How far can jealousy take us if we don't confront it? Cain didn't start as a murderer. He started as a son, a brother, a man who wanted to be seen, to be accepted, to matter. But when those desires were left to rot in silence and comparison, they turned into something deadly. The field, then, is more than a location. It's a symbol, a reminder that even the most ordinary places can become sacred or cursed, depending on the choices we make within them. Where is your brother Abel? God doesn't ask this question because he doesn't know the answer. He's not lacking information. He's inviting confession. He's creating a moment of reckoning, a chance, even after the crime, for Cain to face what he's done, to come clean, to break the silence. But instead of repentance, Cain responds with defiance. I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? That answer chills us even today. Not just because it's a lie, but because it reveals a heart that's hardened, detached, dismissive. There is no trace of sorrow in Cain's voice, no regret, no trembling at the realization of his crime, only a cold attempt to distance himself from responsibility. And that's the tragedy. God's question wasn't only for Cain, it was for all of us. Where is your brother? It's a call to awareness, to accountability, to love, to responsibility for the people we live alongside. And Cain's answer, am I my brother's keeper, is the exact opposite. It's the language of separation, the birth of indifference, and that mindset is just as dangerous as the act itself. In that moment, we see how sin not only damages the soul, it distorts relationships. Cain didn't just kill his brother, he destroyed the bond that should have defined him. Instead of owning the grief, he dodged the weight of it. He tried to bury not only Abel's body, but also the truth. But truth, as we know, never stays buried. God then speaks again, this time with divine sorrow and justice. What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. That image is unforgettable. Blood crying out, the voice of injustice, echoing from the very soil, creation itself bearing witness to a human crime. And there's something deeply spiritual in that imagery. In biblical thought, blood represents life. It is sacred, and when it's spilled unjustly, it doesn't disappear into the dirt. It cries, it testifies, it speaks to God, even when the world tries to stay silent. That's how serious human life is to him. That's how sacred every soul is. God's confrontation reveals both his justice and his broken heart. He is not indifferent. He doesn't brush the sin aside. He doesn't minimize it. But neither does he act without giving Cain a chance to acknowledge it. There's patience here, there's pursuit. Even in the face of evil, God reaches out. And if we pause and we realize that God still asks us the same question today, where is your brother? Where is your sister? Are we ignoring the cries of the hurting? Are we pretending we don't see the injustice around us? Are we washing our hands of responsibility, saying, it's not my problem? Cain's response is a warning, a mirror. It shows us what happens when pride refuses to meet mercy, when guilt is covered in arrogance, when hearts go numb to the pain we've caused. But God's voice, it still calls, still confronts, still invites, not to shame us, but to rescue us, to remind us that every life matters, that blood still cries and that we are our brother's keeper. After confronting Cain with the chilling truth that his brother's blood cries out from the ground, God delivers a judgment that is both sobering and strange. He doesn't strike Cain down on the spot. He doesn't unleash immediate wrath. Instead, God pronounces a curse. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground. which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. This is profound. The very earth once designed to nourish and sustain would now resist Cain. The soil, soaked with innocent blood, would no longer yield its strength. It's as if creation itself turns its face away from the one who violated its sacred balance. Cain is now not only a murderer but a wanderer, a man without a home, a soul without rest. And Cain's response? It isn't repentance, it's fear. "My punishment is more than I can bear," he cries. "I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Notice this. Cain never says, "I'm sorry." He never weeps for Abel. He never begs for forgiveness. He grieves not the sin, but the consequences. His concern is not moral, but personal. But here's the twist. Even in this moment, this raw, broken, undeserving moment, God responds with an act of mercy that shocks us. He says, "Not so." And then, he places a mark on Cain. We're not told what this mark was. Scholars have debated it for centuries. Was it physical, spiritual, symbolic? We may never know, but we do know its purpose. To protect Cain from being killed, to ensure that vengeance would not multiply vengeance, that death would not breed more death. This is staggering. Cain, the first murderer, becomes the first recipient of divine protection after judgment. God doesn't reverse the curse, but he tempers it. He restrains the cycle of violence that Cain had started. He makes a statement: justice must be served, but it must not become an excuse for endless bloodshed. And what does this tell us about God? That even when he judges, he still extends mercy. That his goal is not destruction, but redemption. That no matter how far we fall, he refuses to completely abandon us. His justice is real, yes, but so is his heart. A heart that still marks Cain, not to honor him, not to reward him, but to say, "Even now I am watching. Even now I care." This moment forces us to rethink how we view divine justice. It's not always clean. It's not always what we expect, but it always reveals something deeper about God's nature. His patience, his sorrow, his willingness to hold both judgment and mercy in the same hand. And if Cain could receive a mark of mercy after such a crime, what does that say about the depth of God's grace for us? For the things we've done, for the things we've failed to confess, the mark is not a sign of approval. It's a symbol of undeserved preservation, a reminder that even at humanity's worst, God still whispers the hope of something more, something redemptive, something that doesn't end in vengeance, but maybe, just maybe, ends in grace. Imagine for a moment what it means to be driven away, not just from a place, but from everything familiar, everything safe. Cain is cast out, not simply as a wanderer without land, but as a man severed from the presence of God. This isn't just geographical exile, it's spiritual, emotional, relational. It's the deep, hollow echo of being truly alone. The verse says, "Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden." This line is so short, yet so devastating. East of Eden, that phrase stings. It's not just a direction, it's a symbol, a representation of being further removed from paradise, from innocence, from hope. Adam and Eve had already been cast out of Eden, but now Cain is pushed even further, further from home, further from family, further from God. And the weight of that exile, it lingers, it haunts. The silence that follows is deafening. We don't hear of Cain crying out in repentance. We don't hear of restoration. What we're left with is the image of a man burdened by guilt, marked by mercy, but never fully reconciled. His soul wandering not just across the earth, but within himself. There's a kind of torment in unresolved guilt, in living with the consequences of what we've done, while knowing we can't undo it. Cain didn't die the day he killed Abel, but something inside him did. His identity shifted. Once a son, now a fugitive. Once a worker of the ground, now cursed by it. Once living under the watch of God, now cast from his presence. And yet, even here the story speaks to us. Because how many people today are walking east of Eden? How many carry shame, regret, isolation, feeling like they've blown their only chance? Cain's story, tragic as it is, shines a light on what separation from God feels like. Not fire and brimstone, but distance, disconnection. The ache of a soul that knows it was made for more but can't find its way back. Still, in the silence, there's a whisper. God didn't kill Cain. He didn't erase him. He didn't give up on the idea of humanity. That's important, because even in exile, even in our worst moments, even when we feel beyond redemption, God is not done speaking. And He's not done redeeming. Cain's journey is a warning, yes, but it's also a mirror. A chance for us to ask, where am I walking? Am I still near to God or drifting slowly eastward? And if I am drifting, is there a way back? Now, this is one of the most mysterious and often misunderstood parts of the story, the mark of Cain. After confessing his crime, Cain is overwhelmed by fear. Not just fear of guilt or judgment, but fear of vengeance. He says, "My punishment is more than I can bear, and whoever finds me will kill me." It's raw, vulnerable. He knows what he did, but he's terrified of what others might do to him now. And what does God do in response? He doesn't strike Cain down. He doesn't let others take revenge. Instead, the Lord marks him, not to curse him, but to protect him. Let that sink in. God places a divine mark on the very first murderer to spare his life. That mark isn't just a sign of judgment. It's a symbol of mercy. It's God saying, even now, even after all this, I won't let destruction have the final word. And that's staggering, because from a human perspective, Cain deserved justice, deserved isolation, maybe even death. But God's justice is different. It carries the weight of truth, yes, but also the mystery of compassion. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Mercy always offends our sense of fairness. That's why this mark is so controversial. People ask, why would God protect a killer? Why? Show him kindness, but that's the heart of grace. It isn't deserved. It's given freely. And Cain, despite all he had done, was still God's creation, still part of the story. There's something strangely hopeful in that. Because if God can put a mark of protection on Cain, then maybe there's hope for us too, even when we've made terrible choices. Maybe our worst moment doesn't have to define us forever. Maybe the scars we carry can become signs of something deeper. A God who sees, who knows, and who still offers mercy in the middle of judgment. And that's not a license to sin. It's a call to awe. It reveals a God whose mercy reaches further than our logic, further than our rules, further than our comfort zones. He doesn't excuse Cain, but he doesn't abandon him either. And that tension, that blend of justice and mercy, is where we catch a glimpse of God's heart. So the mark of Cain, it's not just a story detail, it's a powerful question. What does divine mercy look like and when we least deserve it? As the dust settles on the ancient soil where one brother rose and the other fell, the story of Cain and Abel doesn't fade. It echoes through generations, through cultures, through the very fabric of human nature. Why? Because it isn't just a story about two individuals. It's a mirror held up to our own hearts. Cain and Abel represent something primal within us all. The battle between love and envy, between humility and pride, between worship that's genuine and one that's self-serving. Cain's anger wasn't just about God's rejection. It was about being seen, about feeling lesser, about not knowing how to respond to that feeling without tearing someone else down. And let's be honest, don't we all wrestle with that? Maybe not in such extreme ways, but in everyday moments, when we see someone succeed and we don't, when someone's effort gets noticed and ours doesn't, when we feel forgotten by God and others. That subtle bitterness that creeps in, that voice that says, "Why not me?" That's the echo of Cain, and if we don't confront it, it grows. It isolates, it poisons, but the story doesn't leave us hopeless. It also echoes with warning and with invitation. God's words to Cain still speak today. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. In other words, you have a choice. We all do. We're not powerless. We're not destined to repeat Cain's mistake. We can recognize the jealousy, the anger, the despair, and we can choose a different path. That's what makes this story timeless. It teaches us about worship, yes, about relationship, yes, but more than anything, it teaches us about the human heart and the God who sees it, a God who warns before we fall, a God who invites us into honesty, a God who even after our worst, failure still offers mercy. And perhaps that's the most powerful echo of all. That no matter how far we stray, how deep the failure, how loud the shame, God remains. Not as a distant judge, but as a present Father. One who asks, "Where is your brother?" Not because he doesn't know, but because he wants us to. Because healing begins not with hiding, but with truth. So the story of Cain and Abel? It's not just history, it's prophecy. It's a cautionary tale, and it's a call to be better brothers, better sisters, better children of God. To bring offerings not of performance, but of surrender. To fight jealousy with love. And to remember that what we do with the pain in our hearts could change not only our story, but the world around us.